What happens when a Las Vegas Reformed Jewish rabbi and a Las Vegas Presbyterian pastor have a conversation as friends? They discover that no matter where you live or what you believe, faith matters. In this episode of Faith Matters, Rabbi Sanford Akselrad from Congregation near Tamid and Reverend Adrian from Green Valley Presbyterian Church talk about Rabbi's recent trip to Israel in the wake of the Hamas-led terror attacks on October 7th. They also discuss the plight of the Israeli hostages, how different religions feel about the conflict, the future of a two-state solution, and how to promote peace in the region.
Adrian, good to see you. It's been too long since we made a new episode. Here we are all the way in April. A lot has happened.
Yes.
And we've been here and there, and we've had, Easter and Passover is coming up. We had the Jewish holiday of Tu B'Shvat. Just been busy. But I also had the opportunity to travel to Israel, and it was an incredible experience.
And Sandy, I know that our listeners would want to hear about that trip, especially as Israel has such a prominent place in the news. You went there, just over a month or more ago, and you went with a group of people. Tell me about who you went with.
Well, actually, I went, believe it or not, it's been January. So January 27th to the beginning of February. It feels like it was yesterday.
Right.
But it was a group of 37 rabbis, colleagues from around the United States, and a couple from Europe, and part of the Reform Jewish movement. And our goal was really to get a sense of what Israel and Israelis are feeling right now, and also to lend them moral support, and to hear the stories of compassion, concern, frustration, hopes, and dreams. And a lot of what I learned at that time, I think it's still relevant today.
Yes.
as we're in April. I don't think the mood has changed that much.
So when you went, did you have a clear sense of what your mission would be? Or was it really more of, we are going to be a ministry of presence and we will allow the Spirit to move us as we see the need to show compassion and support?
Well, now I know you haven't been on a Jewish group, okay? Because in a Jewish group, there is someone who plans out this itinerary. All right.
Your days were packed, I know.
So you wake up early, and by 8 a.m. you're on the bus, and by 5 or 6 you're back in the hotel. So if there's time for that Spirit to move me, I'm lucky, because they were so thoroughly packed in our itinerary. But the advantage was, in this particular trip, they wanted us to see from the left perspective, which meant people who have worked to promote peace between Israelis and Palestinians, Muslims and Christians, and then all the way to the hard right, which is, we can never trust the Palestinian again, we can never make peace, the two-state solution idea is dead. So we went and listened to people from one end, and then we looked at people from the other end, and then in between we were able to meet, for example, a Reform rabbi who has started to officiate at funerals for soldiers who have been killed in action. And then we actually went to a hospital where they're working on new innovative treatment for PTSD. And then we did what we call a mitzvah project, a project to help the IDF soldiers. So it was very varied. It would probably be at night when I caught my breath, wrote in my journal.
Yes.
That I allowed that, as you might call it, that Spirit to kind of infuse me. But it was a lot to absorb and to process.
If you could tell our listening audience a little bit about those conversations, because we read the news, but there's always our desire for that, the human element. what were some of the conversations, the touch points that you had with people who have been caught in the crossfires of war, people who are grieving loss, people who are worried if their son or daughter is coming home?
So when we had some of these conversations, one of the first places we went was Hostage Square in Tel Aviv. So we started off in Tel Aviv, and there's this square outside of a museum, and organically, after people had been taken hostage, every Saturday night since the start of the war in October, they have been bringing things to create these makeshift memorials to loved ones. And now there's literally like over 100 different monuments, exhibits, displays. And you could walk around and then you would bump into people who were there looking at the faces of people that they knew. And you didn't want to disturb their privacy. So really, in that case, their tears told the story. But then we met with someone who loved one had been taken hostage, and they made it very real about, frankly, their disappointment in the government. And you can put yourselves in their shoes. If their loved one isn't back, they're disappointed. It's natural. I want my loved one back. I don't care about anything except keeping my loved one on the radar. And this is who my loved one is, and this is who I don't want you to forget who he was and who he is. And so we saw that pain through that person's perspective. When we went to the Interfaith Center, which was in Haifa, that was so sad because this organization, which I said is, more of left of center, and their goal is really to promote peace amongst all the different religions in Israel and between Israel and Palestinians and other countries. And the rug has been pulled from under them. In other words, there's very little appetite to support their cause.
Right.
It may come back, but right now, Israelis are going through such pain. The ability to have empathy for, quote, the other is very difficult because right now they're just in the midst of a war and they don't trust people to be reliable partners in peace. This could change, but it's going to take a long time.
And was this connected with the Baha'i temple that's in Haifa?
No, it was not connected. This was a whole different animal.
Okay.
That I don't remember the name of it, but it's a center that's why it exists, is to promote, understanding amongst different religions. And Haifa is a good place for it because Haifa is a very mixed city where people of different religions live in harmony and peace. Very telling. When they set up the meeting, we were supposed to meet with folks from the Muslim tradition, and they were not ready to meet with us. And I could understand that because probably pretty intimidating meeting with 37 rabbis, right?
Right.
So we did meet with someone who was a Christian Druze and Israelis and some others who are part of the organization explaining what they do normally and how they have hundreds of activities over the course of a year. It's a very active center, but now they are regrouping and trying to feel their way.
I'm curious, Sandy, in terms of if you could encapsulate the sentiment of those who really think that we need to do something to promote a lasting peace, and those who have said no, that this can't even exist anymore, no to a two-state solution. What is some of the foundation behind each of those arguments?
Right. It's and as you said, it is an argument. It is different perspectives of what needs to happen. I personally still believe that a two-state solution is going to be the only way for the future. But I do think that what's happened has probably put that idea into the future further than where it was before the war.
Right.
But at the same time, the world is now more urgently calling for that as a solution.
Yes.
So we have a disconnect. Israelis right now are in the midst of grief and trauma and pain. So from an Israeli perspective, they no longer feel they have a partner to trust because on October 7th, some of the people that they did trust that lived in Gaza and worked in the South betrayed them. They also felt that the atrocities that occurred against Israelis, the sexual crimes, the beheading, the burning of buildings were such that now they feel that the people there are just filled with so much hatred, and Hamas has come out and said we'll do October 7th again and again because in their charter is the destruction of Israel. So they say when your enemy says this is what we're going to do, you should believe them. But at the same time, there are Palestinians that I'm sure just want peace, raise their kids, have a place to live, go to work. And those folks are kind of caught in the crosshairs of war, which happens a great deal. So Israelis right now are bent on destroying Hamas, whatever that means, because it means maybe destroying their military capability. I don't know if they can destroy the ideology, but weakening severely that and getting the hostages back. And where there is a real battle in Israel are the people who say, let's get the hostages back, and we don't care if we destroy Hamas. There's just, if we have to do a ceasefire, whatever it is, get those hostages back.
Yes.
And then the other folks who say, but we got to keep pressure on Hamas. We need to do this. And that is the only way we're going to get the hostages back. So sometimes those two goals are in opposition to one another. I think as we talk today, which is April 11th in the press, it's becoming dimmer and dimmer that there are hostages that are alive. Because in one of the negotiations, they talked about finding 30 hostages that might meet the definition.
I read that they said we don't have 30.
Yeah, either they're dead, or they've given them to other terrorist groups, or again, it's psychological, warfare, and that in a small country like Israel is really, really difficult. So how has your church community been relating to Israel? At first on October 8th, the world, kind of came around Israel. We can see now that some of the support for Israel has weakened as we've seen the images on mainstream media about what's going on in Gaza. And of course, our heart breaks when we see people who are undergoing, food insecurity.
It's heart-wrenching.
It is heart-wrenching. Have your church members, kind of turned the tide and not as supportive of Israel? Do they have question marks about what's going on?
I think there are always those that have question marks in terms of what can we do to help promote peace? What can we do to show that we grieve the loss of human life on both sides of this conflict? There are those who would be influenced by the media, who would say, it's really in the hands of Israel now to stop this. There are those who would be influenced by the media who say it's in the hands of Hamas to stop this. So I think, as within any congregation, that there's mixed sentiment.
Right.
I personally, this is me personally, pray about this situation publicly almost every Sunday in some form or another. And you can relate to this as a rabbi, as a pastor as well, that there's a point at which you think, I'm running out of ways to pray. Lord, you know the need. I'll just keep praying the same thing. And that is for peace, for the release of the hostages, that there would be this willingness to come to the table to bring about a lasting peace.
So having looked at so many different sides, I asked myself, okay, it's in the hands of Israel. Israel says we're going to have a ceasefire, but then they have the problem of the hostages. So how do we get those hostages back?
Right,
That's
right.
all right. So even if they gave up this quote goal of decimating Hamas, and they said, you know what, we did a lot of damage, we did our deterrence, everyone's got the idea, but we need those hostages. Is that the deal that is brokered, and is that politically sustainable in Israel? Over 80% of Israelis support the war effort right now. But a high percentage also think, quote, Israel isn't doing enough to bring these hostages back.
Right, right.
So it's very blurred um, um, as to exactly the direction of what Israel should do. And we argue about it in the diaspora and in America, but I want to assure our listeners that in Israel, there is a multiplicity of ideas. And when you read the Israeli press, there are people who are very supportive of Netanyahu's government, and there are people who think that they are totally misguided and they need to do it in a different way. And I think the longer the war continues, and this is a very long war by Israel's standards, by the way, most of their wars are very short. This is very long. There is a concern about the direction of the war, and is it winnable, and what does winnable look like?
And then you look at the long-term impact on a society with loss of life, the long-term impact on a society for an economy. I was speaking to one of my friends this last week who lives north of Galilee, and I asked him a question. He said, I've been out of work since October 7th.
Yeah.
And
the tourist industry decimated, the people from the south, some of them are just starting to go home, but a lot of them are too traumatized to come back to their home. The people in the north and the Galilee have been moved to the center. If you were to go there, like I did in the hotels, literally families were moved and are now. I was in the Panorama hotel brand, and all three of the hotels I stayed at all had families that were living in that hotel, and it's still going on now. And some are able to work remotely by Zoom, but they've had to set up schooling for the kids, and the government's been providing financial assistance, and you wonder how long can that continue.
It's interesting you say that, because I was talking to another friend of mine, Father Eamon Kelly, who's at Magdala. And Magdala has a large retreat center, and which is connected with Notre Dame in Jerusalem. And he said, he's one of the priests there, and he said it's interesting because it's just flooded with families who have been moved there from one of the kibbutzim. And he said in some way for him, he's just so overfilled with joy to walk down in the lobby or to leave mass, and there's children and there's studying. And he said it's a very different atmosphere. There's no tourist in the hotel, but he's come to know these families very, very well. I talked to another friend of mine who's in Jerusalem, and he's at the Armenian community. And he said, sometimes we go about our life, and honestly, we don't even know there's a war. Other days we do.
Yeah. I remember, a lot of people said, Rabbi, when you went, were you scared? Now, this was a few months ago, and I was nervous, but some of my colleagues had already made the trip. There was only one time we were in the bus, we were leaving Tel Aviv on the way to Haifa, and there's an app that alerts you to when rockets are being fired at Israel. And it's connected to Iron Dome, which is this protective system that Israel has to intercept rockets that might hit a population. And you have about 45 seconds to react. and go to a bomb shelter or some kind of shelter. When you're on a bus, the bus has to pull over, and literally you get down on your belly in the aisle. And it's not that they don't think Iron Dome's going to protect you. It's that when it intercepts that rocket, there could be shrapnel that falls down from the sky. So we actually did pull over one time, and then they determined that the rockets weren't coming our way. They were more towards Israel, Tel Aviv proper, and we had already left the city. So on we went. No one broke a sweat. It was a moment where I thought, well, this is kind of real. And this is what Israelis are going through every single day. Well, there's so much more we could talk about, but I think our time is up. Maybe we'll have another opportunity to revisit it. But for now, I think
I want to say one word as we close, and that is our scriptures. It's from Matthew's gospel. But these words that Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount, and Jesus says, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God."
I think
thank you for what you did. Thank you for what you did, because it shows your faith, and it shows that as people of faith, we have really a moral imperative to help those in times of trouble.
Well, let's end on that optimistic note. You're a good friend and a good supporter of Israel, and we pray for the peace of Israel and for all impacted by this awful war. So, dear listeners, thank you so much for tuning in on this special episode of Faith Matters. And we hope that when it comes to matters in your life, in the news, that your faith and your sense of belief and even your doubts will matter. And as they matter to you, they will help guide you in life's daily challenges. So thanks for tuning in, everyone.
Shalom.
We'll talk to you next time. Shalom.
Faith Matters features Rabbi Sanford Akselrad from Congregation near Tamid and Reverend Adrian from Green Valley Presbyterian Church, and is produced by Leslie Snadowsky. We hope you join us again for our next podcast episode of Faith Matters.